She was bleeding, gasping, alone. Against every instinct to surrender, she still slid behind the wheel of a car in the pre-dawn darkness of Nashville. Her name was Kayona Wilson, 42 years old. It was just after 5:45 a.m. on Monday, January 27th, 2025. She flagged down an officer outside the Madison precinct, her abdomen pierced by a bullet, her life slipping away. Why would a wife drive herself to the police station bleeding after a confrontation? Because she believed her husband was inside the house behind her. A man who, according to police, was in a relationship with another woman. 42-year-old Kayosha Greer. Kayona had located her husband's car parked behind the home on Scalf Drive. She used her own key to move it to the front of the house. Then she knocked on the front door. A voice answered, not the husband's, but the woman he was allegedly seeing. Through the door speaker system, the confrontation began. Words were exchanged, accusations made. Moments later, something changed. The first shot rang out, fired by Greer through the storm door. It did not hit Kayona. Undeterred, Kayona forced entry into the home. A violent struggle erupted. Then, a second shot. This one struck Kayona in the abdomen. Bleeding, Kayona left the residence. She climbed into the car she had moved moments earlier, drove a short distance, and pulled up beside the precinct building. She flagged down an officer. She was rushed to the hospital, where she later died from her wound. And in the quiet aftermath, the question lingers. Was it self-defense, or was something else at play? A wife, a mistress, a husband caught between them. One knock, 2 shots, 1 life gone. Would you walk into a house if your partner was inside with someone else, knowing there was a gun? Who was Kayona? Kayona Denise Wilson was 42 years old at the time of her tragic death on January 27, 2025. She was a married woman, walking through life with hopes, commitments, and dreams. According to her obituary, she was born October 9, 1982, in Nashville, Tennessee, to Michael Underwood and Yolanda McClinton. Friends and family described her as strong-willed and emotionally intense, someone who did not shrink from conflict when she believed the stakes were high. In her spare moments, she enjoyed gardening, working on DIY projects, even auto repair. She held a bachelor's degree in business administration, earned at Bethel University, and was employed as a property manager with MDHA, Metropolitan Development and Housing Agency, since 2020. Her life before the incident. Kayona lived in the Nashville area, carried the responsibilities of her job, the emotional weight of her marriage, and the reality of betrayal she had come to suspect. In the months leading up to that morning on Scalf Drive, she believed her husband was involved with someone else. Police reports later indicated that she sought out his alleged girlfriend, 42-year-old Kayosha Greer. Her decision to drive to the house on Scalf Drive was not impulsive. It was born of suspicion, heartbreak, anger, and perhaps a yearning to reclaim something she felt was slipping from her grasp. She found her husband's car behind the home and used her own key to move it to the front, signaling she was going in. This was not just a crime headline. Kayona was a daughter, a wife, a professional, a woman who believed in her marriage and fought for it until her final moment. She wasn't just a victim of a tragedy. She was someone trying to reclaim her life, to piece back what she believed had been fractured. And that fight cost her everything. Picture her waking that morning with a tremor in her heart, knowing something was wrong, grappling with betrayal, making a choice to confront the truth. Imagine her at the door, heart pounding, anticipation and dread colliding. And then the gunshot, the confusion, the blood, the race to the police precinct, the collapse, the hospital, the silence. Kayona fought. She made a decision to intervene, to challenge what she believed was happening in her life. That decision led her into a confrontation that ended in her death. Her story forces us to look beyond the label victim into the complex human being she was. Flawed, determined, hurt, but fully alive until that final moment. In the pre-dawn stillness of Monday morning, January 27, 2025, a scene was about to unfold on a quiet street in Madison, Tennessee. A suburban slice of the greater Nashville, Tennessee area, where tree-lined roads and modest homes give the impression of safety and routine. On one such block, on Scalf Drive, the kind of neighborhood where children ride bikes and neighbors wave early before heading to work. The calm of the morning would be shattered. Scalf Drive itself is part of the residential fabric of Madison. Homes set back, front yards faintly lit by street lamps, a driveway or two with cars parked as the world outside sleeps. Just a short drive away sits the Metro Nashville Police Department, Madison Precinct, lending both proximity and a sense of institutional presence. Around 5:45 a.m., when most of the neighborhood was still wrapped in darkness, only the dim glow of early dawn hinting at what would come, 42-year-old Kayona Wilson pulled up in her husband's vehicle, bleeding, exhausted, but determined. She flagged down an officer outside the precinct, the quiet suburb waking to something irreversible. In that moment, before the sun rose, before street signs became clearly visible, before neighbors even stirred, the normal rhythm of the block was broken. The driveway where a car should have been parked. The storm door cracked open. Voices through a speaker system. A homeowner from behind. A knock. A gunshot. 2 women. 1 conflict. A fatal outcome. A setting that looked safe every day. But inside, on that morning, everything changed. The kind of quiet neighborhood where you'd expect cars to idle for school drop-off. Not bullet casings on the porch. The kind of place where 5:45 a.m. might mean the coffee pot is brewing. But instead, it meant a woman collapsed, bleeding, in front of a police station, having made a drive she could never reverse. And so the story begins. In a place of routine, at an hour of expectation, with a woman driven by betrayal and desire for answers, walking into danger that would cost her life. It began in the pre-dawn hush of January 27, 2025. At roughly 5:45 a.m., 42-year-old Kayona Wilson pulled up to a modest house on Scalf Drive in the Madison section of Nashville, Tennessee. Her heart pounding, she moved with purpose, a drive rooted in suspicion, pain, and a longing for resolution. The timeline of the incident: inside her husband's car, the same vehicle she located parked behind the home, Kayona slid into the driver's seat. Using her own key, she shifted the vehicle to the front of the house, a symbolic act of confrontation. She stepped out into the morning darkness and made her way to the front door. Without knocking gently, she banged and demanded answers. Her husband. Was he inside? Was this the place? The house belonged to 42-year-old Kayosha Greer, the woman with whom Kayona believed her husband was involved. The tension rose swiftly. Verbal altercation through surveillance system. On the other side of the door, Greer did not emerge at first. Instead, she spoke through the home's surveillance speaker system, an unexpected barrier between woman and woman. Through the speaker came words: anger, disbelief, accusations. Kayona demanded to know if her husband was inside. Greer responded with her own questions and denials. Voices were raised. The background hum of suburban morning was shattered by shouting, betrayal, and fear. The shots fired, then the first gunshot. Greer fired through the storm door. The projectile did not strike Kayona. Instead of retreating, Kayona forced her way inside. The door swung open. What followed was a physical struggle. 2 women locked in conflict. Furniture tipped. Shouts echoed. A man's car sat parked just feet away, silent. In one devastating move, a second gunshot rang out. This time, the bullet struck Kayona in the abdomen. She staggered out of the home, crimson staining her clothes, her strength fading, but one thing remained: her determination. Verbal altercation through surveillance system. On the other side of the door, Greer did not emerge at first. Instead, she spoke through the home's surveillance speaker system, an unexpected barrier between woman and woman. Through the speaker came words: anger, disbelief, accusations. Kayona demanded to know if her husband was inside. Greer responded with her own questions and denials. Voices were raised. The background hum of suburban morning was shattered by shouting, betrayal, and fear. The shots fired, then the first gunshot. Greer fired through the storm door. The projectile did not strike Kayona. Instead of retreating, Kayona forced her way inside. The door swung open. What followed was a physical struggle. 2 women locked in conflict. Furniture tipped. Shouts echoed. A man's car sat parked just feet away, silent. In one devastating move, a second gunshot rang out. This time, the bullet struck Keona in the abdomen. She staggered out of the home, crimson staining her clothes, her strength fading, but one thing remained: her determination. Keona's final act. Bleeding, she climbed into the husband's car once more. She managed to drive a short distance out of the driveway, onto the street, toward the precinct, toward help. Outside the Metro Nashville Police Department Madison precinct, she flagged down an officer. Her voice faltered, her strength nearly gone. Then she collapsed. Taken to Skyline Medical Center, she would not recover. Her life extinguished in a confrontation born of love, betrayal, and desperate confrontation. In the aftermath, no charges have been filed. The investigation continues. Police response and initial discovery. In the moments after 42-year-old Keona Wilson collapsed outside the precinct and was rushed to the hospital, the Metro Nashville Police Department, MNPD, shifted into investigative mode. A team was dispatched to the house on Scalf Drive where the shooting had occurred. Officers secured the scene at the residence, corralling the area, preserving evidence, and marking the path Keona had taken from the home to the car. It was here that they began cataloging the physical environment: the front door, the storm door through which a bullet had been fired, the entryway where a struggle occurred, and the driveway where the husband's car was moved from the rear to the front of the house. Detectives interviewed witnesses, neighbors who may have heard raised voices in the early morning darkness, vehicles entering or exiting, that faint rattle of a door, the snap of a gunshot that disturbed a suburban quiet. They collected statements, photographed the scene, and preserved the home's surveillance system footage. Keosha Greer's statement. At the center of the investigation was 42-year-old Keosha Greer, the woman whose home had been entered. According to police reports, Greer claimed she acted in self-defense. She stated that Keona had forced entry onto her property, had knocked, and then entered her home without permission, that the husband's car had been parked behind the home, and that the confrontation escalated quickly. Greer said she feared for her safety. She maintained that when Keona forced her way in, a physical altercation ensued. In her account, when the first shot was fired at the storm door and missed, the danger had already been established. So when the second shot struck Keona, it was a response in the heat of that struggle. Investigators noted her statements immediately raised key questions. Was the entry by Keona unlawful? Did Greer have a legal right to respond with deadly force? Had the husband been present inside? What was the precise nature of the confrontation? Physical evidence investigators found the home's surveillance system had recorded parts of the confrontation.
Come on, now show me where you at. You need to go that way. I ain't worried about that. No, you need to go that way. Come on. Now ain't nobody gonna come no and well, girl, you're not gonna be doing this over my goddamn house. Well, okay, he's gonna call you or whatever. Well, you need to call him. But you're not gonna do this here. I'm not trying to. Well, how you not trying to? You just did it.
Police confirmed 2 fired rounds, one that struck only the storm door, one that struck Keona in the abdomen. Inside the entryway, evidence of a struggle was present: a tipped chair, imprints of scuffed flooring, the trail of blood. The husband's car, moved from behind the house to the front by Keona's own key, was photographed and its movements logged. Forensic teams collected shell casings, examined the storm door for bullet impact, gathered fingerprints and DNA near the point of forced entry, and charted the taxi-style trajectory Keona had taken from the house to the precinct. Every scratched door frame, every trace of blood, and every surveillance timestamp served as puzzle pieces. Legal complications. A deeper layer of the investigation involved Greer's criminal history. Court records show that Keosha Greer has previously faced charges of attempt first-degree murder, a felony offense. If Greer is a convicted felon, she may have been prohibited from legally possessing a firearm, a separate legal issue that could complicate her claim of lawful self-defense. Investigators are looking into whether she was legally allowed to hold the gun, whether the weapon was registered, and whether the prior charges were resolved in such a way as to restrict her gun rights. The prosecutors must ask, did Greer's status interact with the reasonableness of her self-defense claim? Did she provoke the incident by using the speaker system or by refusing to respond in person? Is there a duty to retreat in that home entry scenario under Tennessee law? All of these questions become entangled in the forensic and statutory details. The central silent figure in this case is the husband of Kayona Wilson. His name has not been publicly released in the available police or news records, and as of the latest update, he remains unnamed in public reports. What we know is he was reportedly in a romantic relationship with Keosha Greer, the owner of the house on Scalf Drive where the fatal shooting occurred, and the woman Kayona believed her husband was with. Known details. The husband's car was key evidence. Kayona found it parked behind Greer's home on the morning of January 27, 2025. She used her own key to move it to the front of the house. Police say that her husband was allegedly inside the home at the time of the confrontation, though his exact whereabouts during the gunshots are not confirmed. Crucially, even though the husband was allegedly present, he did not come out to intervene, speak publicly, or apparently engage witnesses. The lack of his visible action raises questions. Why didn't he step in? What was he doing during those minutes? His minimal visibility in the narrative adds to the mystery. In a thesis of betrayal and confrontation, he becomes the absent axis around which both women pivot. Psychological weight. Imagine sitting behind a door, listening to the two women in your life fight, knowing one may not survive. This is a scenario that flips normal dynamics. Instead of a protective husband, we have a man shadowed by suspicion, hidden by circumstance, whose car gives away his presence, yet whose voice is absent. Kayona came searching for him. Greer defended her domain, claiming he was there. The husband's silence, whether by fear, indecision, or something else, becomes a haunting backdrop. From Kayona's perspective, she believed her marriage was under threat. She believed that the man she married was inside that house, across the threshold. She took action, confronting, moving the car, knocking on the door, perhaps hoping he would step outside and clarify, de-escalate, or stand with her. Instead, he remained unseen, unheard. From Greer's perspective, she says the husband was there. An argument about his presence triggered everything. She claims she acted in fear for her safety inside her own home. The husband's presence, real or alleged, becomes the trigger for the escalation. From the husband's role, he becomes both the cause and the witness, a catalyst behind the scenes. What was he thinking? Did he anticipate the confrontation? Did he try to avoid it? Did he urge one or both women ahead of time? The records don't say, but the emotional stakes are clear. A man with two women, one marriage, one house, a confrontation he could not escape. The triangle is set: wife, mistress, husband, and in the early morning hours of January 27, 2025, that triangle crushed into collision. Was it self-defense? Or something more? When the first shot rang out through the storm door and mist, it marked a pivotal moment, not just physically, but psychologically. The person who pulled the trigger was Keosha Greer, the homeowner, and the wounded woman was Kayona Wilson. Police say Keosha fired after Kayona forced her way inside. Greer claims she feared for her life. She says Kayona breached her home, started a violent confrontation, and she defended herself with deadly force. But was the force proportionate? Was the fear reasonable? These questions swirl around the case. Here we face the fork. If Greer acted in legitimate self-defense, then her actions, though tragic, may be legally justified. But if her response was excessive, then what occurred may cross the line into unlawful homicide. Was Greer genuinely afraid? We must envision Greer's mindset. A woman inside her home, possibly awakened by a loud knock, or perhaps aware of tension building outside. She listens to a voice using her speaker system, accuses her, demands answers about a man she allegedly shares a relationship with. At some point, she fires a warning shot through the storm door. That first missed shot may signal her threshold of fear. She believed something unsafe was happening. But then she fires a second time, hitting Keona. Was that shot driven by clear threat or by anger in the heat of conflict? Police reports say a physical struggle was underway when the fatal shot was fired. Did she overreact with deadly force? The concept of overreaction becomes essential. Keona approached, knocked, challenged Greer through the surveillance system, forced entry, and engaged in a physical altercation. That sequence suggests escalating confrontation rather than a sudden, unprovoked attack. On the other side, Greer's decision to use a firearm twice raises the question whether a less lethal response was possible, whether retreat could have been exercised, or whether the struggle forced her hand. Inside that entryway, the distinction between self-defense and disproportionate force becomes thin because one woman was injured and died, and the investigation notes charges have not been brought yet. Prosecutors must determine whether Greer's claim of fear was legally justified in context. Behavioral theories. Greer is said to have a history of violence. Prior charges, including attempted murder, have been reported. While full details of conviction aren't publicly specified, this history could indicate a pattern of response under threat or a predisposition to escalate conflict. Keona, on the other hand, was emotionally driven. A spouse allegedly betrayed, the car behind the house, the key inserted, the knock at the door. Her actions speak of urgency, heartbreak, possibly desperation. Her decision to move the car and confront the other woman indicates a proactive step, which suggests she felt powerless prior and decided to act. Such emotional states, anger, betrayal, fear of loss, can push individuals to actions they might not normally take. Keona's strong-willed personality, combined with heartbreak, may have overridden caution, moved her into what she perceived as a final intervention. Domestic triangle psychology. The setting is a classic but volatile triangle: husband, wife, other woman. Each role carries emotional weight and triggers. Betrayal triggers. For Keona, the discovery of her husband's relationship possibly triggered a deep fear of replacement, of loss, of humiliation. The tangible proof, his car behind the house, turned what might have been suspicion into confrontation. Possession versus protection. Greer may have felt she had a right to protect her home, her partner, her relationship. But the use of a gun introduces possession in an extreme form. Possession of the weapon, possession of the situation. Hell hath no fury. Though the phrase wasn't to be used originally, the emotional weight is similar. Two women facing off, the husband silent, the home becomes battlefield. In that moment, ordinary rules bend. The husband's presence or absence further destabilizes. Why did he not emerge? Was he a mere bystander or part of the trigger? His silence speaks volumes. So we arrive. On a cold January morning, emotions collided. A woman demanding answers. Another woman fearing intrusion. A man caught between two worlds. And a bullet fired behind a door. In a home meant to be safe. Stand your ground, castle and home defense laws under Tennessee Code. Paragraph 3911-611. A person in Tennessee who is in their residence, business, dwelling, or vehicle is presumed to have held a reasonable belief of imminent death or serious bodily injury if the force used is intended or likely to cause death or serious bodily injury, and the other person forcibly enters the space. Additionally, Tennessee has a stand your ground principle. A person who is not engaged in unlawful activity and is in a place where they have a right to be may use deadly force without the duty to retreat. However, critically, the use of deadly force must be reasonably necessary to prevent death or serious bodily injury and cannot be simply to defend property. In the case of Keosha Greer and Keona Wilson, the legal question becomes, did Greer reasonably and legally believe she faced imminent death or serious bodily injury when she fired the second shot? Or was the force used excessive given the circumstances? Forced entry plus verbal confrontation plus physical altercation? Forced entry versus confrontation. Because Keona allegedly forced her way into Greer's home, moving the husband's car, knocking, then entering, and began a physical struggle. This raises the issue of unlawful and forcible entry. Under Tennessee law, there is a presumption of threat if someone unlawfully and forcibly enters your dwelling. On the other hand, home defense laws don't give an automatic license to use deadly force in every confrontation. The force must still be proportionate to the threat. In other words, if the intrusion and struggle meet the threshold of a forcible entry and imminent threat, Greer may invoke home defense protections. If not, the risk of a charge for excessive force increases. Illegal possession of a firearm under Tennessee Code, paragraph 39 Taka 17 Tau 1307. It is unlawful for a person convicted of a felony, including a felony of violence or felony drug offense, to possess a firearm unless certain rights have been restored. Reports linked to Greer indicate she may have prior charges for attempted murder. If she is indeed a convicted felon, then her possession of a firearm at the time of the shooting could itself be a Class E felony, or worse, depending on prior history, under Tennessee law. Thus, even if Greer's use of the gun is considered legally justified in self-defense, the question remains whether she was legal to have the firearm in the first place. That separate firearm possession violation could become the focus of prosecution, independent of the homicide investigation. No charges filed. Yet as of the latest public information, no formal criminal charges have been filed against Greer. The investigation by the Metro Nashville Police Department remains ongoing. Investigators must determine whether Greer's threat perception was reasonable, whether the use of force was proportionate, whether she was legally permitted to possess the firearm, what role, if any, the husband played or should play in the case. Meanwhile, public opinion is divided. Some view Greer as acting in legitimate self-defense inside her home. Others view her actions as an excessive, deadly overreaction to a domestic confrontation. The gap between legal standard and public perception adds complexity. Will prosecutors treat this as justified self-defense or as a homicide compounded by illegal gun possession? Was the husband truly inside during the incident? One of the most persistent unknowns is whether the husband of Keona Wilson was actually inside the home on Scalf Drive at the time of the confrontation. The official police statement confirms that Wilson went to the residence looking for her husband, who was in a dating relationship with another woman. Further, one media account states, Wilson's husband was inside the house when the shooting occurred, yet there is no publicly released verification of his exact presence or location inside the residence at the moment of the shots. If he was inside, where was he? If not, why did both women talk as though he might have been? This ambiguity changes how the confrontation is understood. If he was present, then Wilson's claim of confronting the marital infidelity gains a tangible witness. If he wasn't, then the argument and subsequent shooting revolve around a belief rather than a confirmed fact. Why didn't he intervene? Assuming he was inside the home or nearby, why did he not walk out during the shouting, the knock at the door, or the initial gunshot? Why did he remain silent while two women, his wife and his partner, confronted each other at his car and his home? Consider the moments. Keona moves his car. She knocks. Greer answers through the speaker system. Voices are raised. Then a shot is fired, all in the span of minutes. Yet the husband remains absent from the public record of the scene. His silence, or his physical absence, becomes a question in itself. Was he paralyzed by fear, torn by guilt, or purposefully withdrawn? His non-intervention also adds a dimension of abandonment to Wilson's narrative. She drove to this location wanting him, perhaps to speak, perhaps to reclaim their relationship, and found neither him emerging nor support behind the door. That absence may have intensified her sense of isolation and fueled the extreme decision to force entry. Could this have been avoided if someone de-escalated? With all the benefit of hindsight, we ask, could different decisions have prevented the tragedy? Could the husband have de-escalated by meeting his wife earlier? Or could Greer have walked outside to talk instead of hiding behind a speaker? Could Wilson have chosen a safer approach rather than forcing entry? In domestic triangle confrontations, psychological research suggests that delays, avoidance, or third-party mediation reduce risk of violence. Instead, this episode moved quickly into a knock, forceful entry, and gunfire. Was there time to call the husband, message him, or walk away? Perhaps. Would that have prevented what happened? Possibly. It's a speculative path, but the question lingers. A little delay? A different door? A talk instead of a knock? Might that have saved a life? What happened in the moments just before the second shot? We know the first shot was fired through the storm door and missed. Then Wilson forcibly entered the residence. Then the physical struggle. Then the second shot. That struck Wilson in the abdomen, but the exact motion by motion of that struggle remains unreleased. What were the positions of both women? Where was the gun when she fired? Was the husband inside? Was he participating in the altercation? The surveillance footage may hold part of the answer, but the public reporting stops short of describing that critical lull between strike one and strike two. When the fatal decision was made, we are left to wonder, was Greer backed into a corner? Was Wilson advancing? Was the gun drawn earlier? Did Greer warn Wilson again? Why was the second shot necessary? These unanswered questions turn the story from one of clear facts into a true crime mystery with human shadows. The marital partner who may have been inside but didn't act. The moment of escalation that might have been prevented. The deadly decision made in the seconds between struggle and gunfire. The story of Kiona Wilson is not just a tragedy. It's a reflection of a far larger crisis, one that often goes unspoken until it turns fatal. In domestic relationships, especially those entangled in love triangles, tension can reach volatile levels. What happened in Nashville is sadly not unique. In fact, statistics show that women are at the highest risk of violence or homicide during periods of separation or relationship conflict, particularly when betrayal or emotional abandonment is involved. According to the CDC and the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, nearly 1 in 3 women who are murdered in the U.S. are killed by a current or former intimate partner, ncadv.org, and the time immediately after a relationship begins to unravel is often the most dangerous. That danger doesn't always come from an abusive partner, but from the unpredictable emotional dynamics that unfold when fear, jealousy, rejection, and betrayal all collide at once. In Kiona's case, the roles blur. Was she a victim of infidelity and emotional abandonment? Was she also the initiator of a forced confrontation that escalated beyond control? Was Greer a woman defending her space, or did she respond with disproportionate violence? In these moments, the line between victim and aggressor becomes dangerously thin, especially when everyone involved believes they are in the right, and emotions run higher than logic. This case urges us to ask hard questions. Are we doing enough to address volatile domestic disputes before they erupt? Do we understand how heartbreak can turn deadly in a matter of minutes? And what mechanisms, emotional, legal, or societal, could have prevented what happened that morning? The lesson is clear. Emotional violence often precedes physical violence, and the silence or absence of a third party, in this case, the husband, can act as fuel to the fire. A woman died. A man stayed silent. Another woman holds the gun. But who truly holds the blame? This wasn't just about love. It was about fear, about power, about control. It was about a quiet Monday morning that erupted into irreversible violence, not in an alleyway or on some distant road, but in a suburban home, in a relationship gone frayed at the edges, behind a door where 3 lives had once been entangled. When Kiona Wilson stepped out of her home that morning, she wasn't just looking for her husband. She was looking for closure, for answers, for a sense that her life hadn't been discarded. What she found instead was a confrontation that ended in a fatal shot, and silence from the one man who could have changed the outcome. Kiosha Greer fired the gun, but the question that lingers is whether she fired out of fear or out of control. And the husband? His absence isn't just a detail. It's the ghost that haunts every scene, the missing presence that turned tension into tragedy. This case, like so many in the true crime landscape, doesn't leave us with neat answers, only echoes, echoes of choices, echoes of silence, echoes of a door that opened and never closed the same again. Now it's your turn to weigh in. Was this self-defense or second-degree murder? Was Kiosha Greer protecting herself inside her home from a violent intruder? Or did she cross a line when she pulled the trigger? Should she be charged for illegally possessing a firearm? If Greer is indeed a convicted felon, should the law hold her accountable, even if she fired in self-defense? And perhaps the hardest question of all, what would you have done if you were the husband? Would you have stepped in, tried to stop it, or stayed hidden, hoping it would resolve itself? Like this video if you think more people need to hear about Keona Wilson's story, not just as a tragedy, but as a warning about what can unfold when emotion, betrayal, and silence mix. Subscribe for daily deep dives into America's most chilling true crime cases, where facts meet psychology and justice isn't always black and white. Drop your theories in the comments. Was this case mishandled? What clue stood out most to you? We read every single one. Your insight matters. Because in true crime, the story doesn't end with the final scene. It ends with the conversation that follows.